opposition and the entire debate, we have Douglas Murray, a best-selling political author and journalist, famed for his controversial views. In someone else wrote this. In 2007, he assisted in the writing of Towards a Grand Strategy for an Uncertain World. He's been dubbed Britain's only neoconservative and is the director of the Centre for Social Cohesion. So, Douglas, thank you very much.
Thank you for that warm introduction, and it's a great pleasure as always to be back at the Cambridge Union and to be debating alongside my friends, comrades, colleagues, and against such distinguished opponents from the world of British diplomacy, British journalism, and a fine example of current British academia. All three distinguished men in their field, three wise men. They should have come in cloaks. Three men who, between them, demonstrate why Britain is a second, currently slipping to a third-rate world power. Because what you have heard tonight wouldn't stand up to the briefest overview. Sir Richard, distinguished diplomat, said all these years after international negotiations have been going on that the power of negotiation has not been tested. He said that this side underestimates Iran. I can assure you, Sir Richard, we do not. He said that we exaggerate the threat to Israel. Again, I can assure you we do not. He said that in fact, it wasn't Iran that all these years pursuing nuclear technology has been brushing aside international law, but it was this side of the debate. He further said, and I can barely say it with a straight face, so I don't know how he managed, that there is no evidence of an Iranian desire to use the bomb. He then talked, of course, about mutually assured destruction, without mentioning that it, to some people, sounds like a great idea. The regime in Iran has hardly been seriously mentioned tonight. I'm pretty simplistic in the way I would do even the first analysis of a nation. But I tend to think that you can tell quite a lot about a government by two things: what they say and what they do. What they say in Iran has been brushed aside by Sir Richard and his eminent colleagues. It's been brushed aside as it were, a detail that President Ahmadinejad has talked about wiping from the page of history a UN member state, and that the so-called moderate who ran against Ahmadinejad some years ago, Mr. Rafsanjani, said that after all Iran only needed one nuclear bomb to deal with the Israeli problem. They ignored the fact that the supreme leader, Khamenei, has said exactly the same thing. And then what they do, which is that Iran is acting now, as it has been for years, as a regional destabilizer. Destabilizing Syria, destabilizing the Lebanon, funding the terrorist movements of Hezbollah and Hamas, who, not content with expressing their genocidal intent towards Israel and trying to fulfill that desire every day, have also managed to wreck our friends' best chances of democracy in Lebanon. So that's what they say and what they do. The other side this evening seems to think that an Iran with the bomb would be preferable to a war with Iran without the bomb. Regional proliferation in the Middle East is not a small issue. A Middle East, as Dr. Mendoza said, in which everybody had a nuclear bomb, would be a system of détente, which I think we can probably say with some certainty would break down fairly swiftly. But would the Iranian regime I've just described be weaker or stronger once it was a nuclear power? I think we can agree on both sides of the House it would be stronger. Now, would the regime, which has spent again recent weeks, as it did in 2009, rounding up opponents, rounding up, shooting, torturing and raping your fellow students there in Iran, Sir Richard objected to Dr. Mendoza's description of mass rapes. I asked him what mass would be in his opinion. He said millions. I'd love to find out what Her Majesty's diplomatic service's level of toleration of mass rape is. Hundreds, thousands, whatever it is, but it was nonsense to mention it, what is happening to your fellow students. Do you think that the Iranian regime that is doing that is violating and trampling on every right of your contemporaries in Iran, would be weaker or stronger in power once it was also a nuclear power? I think that I think I've heard enough. Hardly needs to be raised as a question. Now look, it hasn't come up very much tonight, but it should come up. Israel. This motion that this House would rather have a nuclear Iran than war, and the support I think I've already sensed for our opponents here tonight, suggests to me, and it would to many other people, that we are very grateful that this House doesn't have a say in whether or not Iran will become a nuclear power. And what's more, very grateful that Britain, and I hate to say this in front of a diplomat, but Britain has itself absolutely no way of stopping this. This is a theoretical question raised by theoreticians in an abstract manner, because it doesn't matter to you. And perhaps it shouldn't. Perhaps it shouldn't matter at all. But I will not leave this debate tonight without mentioning the people it matters to most, which is the people of the country that successive leaders in Iran have said they will erase from the page of time. Leaders who deny the last Holocaust whilst saying they want the next. I was speaking to a friend of mine just yesterday, whose father was a Holocaust survivor, and he said to his father one thing before he died: what one lesson would you take from the Holocaust? And he said, I take this lesson. When someone says they want to annihilate you, believe them. Don't think they're joking. Don't think they don't mean it. The Israeli people have reason not to want or need you and your opinions on their future. In 1973, when Israel, 6 years after the previous attempt to annihilate it as a state by its neighbours, once again saw its neighbours' armies amassing on the borders, the Israeli government wanted to strike preemptively to stop that war. They didn't. They didn't, among other things, because they knew that if they did strike preemptively, America would not provide them with any munitions. Kissinger said this himself afterwards. So they waited, and they were attacked, as they knew they would be, and they lost many good people. But they were then able to retaliate. They were then able to push those armies out of Israel. But, and this is a crucial thing to remember, the American planes were not allowed to land and refuel, bringing supplies to that country when it was on the brink of being ended, were not allowed to land in any European country, even to refuel. When Israel was about to be ended, you couldn't even stop a plane for a couple of hours on European soil, because the Europeans cared more about the oil deals they were doing with Arabs than they did about the future of that state. Since October 1973, not a single Israeli has thought seriously that when they were about to be annihilated, you or any Europeans would lift a finger, and they knew you wouldn't, and they were right to know you wouldn't, and you wouldn't. When Israel is pushed to the situation it will be pushed to, of having to believe they mean it, and when every bit of jiggery-pokery behind the scenes runs out, and when the UN and distinguished figures have run out of time, and Iran is about to produce its first bomb, Israel will strike. Every single country, including this one, people from our elegant diplomatic service, people from America, everyone will condemn Israel. Everyone in the Middle East will condemn Israel. And they will go back to their homes and they will say in private, thank God for Israel. The Saudis, the Bahrainis, the Egyptians, the Libyans, the Lebanese, everybody will say, thank God they did it, because nobody else would. The proposition being put before you tonight is that you have a choice between war and an Iran with the bomb. You have a choice, as has been said before, between war and dishonour. You'll choose dishonour this evening and you'll get war. You have the choice between a war with a nuclear Iran or a war at some point with an Iran that is not nuclear, which you stop from ever being nuclear, and hope that in stopping that regime, in embedding itself, you will give the Iranian people the best chance they will have of overthrowing that regime. But as I say, thank God this doesn't rely on you or any Europeans, because you've made the same mistake before and nobody should trust you to get it right this time.